Mike Hansen thought he'd found his soulmate when Ruby's messages lit up his lonely Seattle nights. What started as a fairy tale romance had become a nightmare, leaving Hansen to discover that sometimes the most expensive lesson you can learn is the difference between being chosen and choosing yourself. The airplane wheels hit the runway with a thud that made Mike Hansen's heart skip. After 14 hours in the air, he was finally here, Manila, Philippines. The place where his new life would begin. The place where Ruby was waiting for him. Mike pressed his face against the small window and saw a city that looked nothing like Seattle. Tall buildings reached toward a blazing sun. Cars moved in crazy patterns on roads that seemed to have no rules. Everything looked hot and busy and alive. His phone buzzed. A message from Ruby. "I'm so excited to see you, my love. My heart is beating so fast." Mike smiled and typed back. "Mine too. I can't believe this is really happening." But something felt different about her messages today. Usually Ruby sent long texts full of hearts and kisses. Today her words seemed shorter, colder. Mike shook his head. He was just nervous. That was normal, right? The customs line moved slowly. Mike's shirt stuck to his back in the thick, humid air. He pulled out his phone again and looked at Ruby's photo, the one where she was smiling on a beach, her long black hair flowing in the wind. She was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. And somehow, she'd chosen him. Next, the customs officer called. Mike stepped forward and handed over his passport. The officer looked at it, then at Mike, then back at the passport. "Business or pleasure?" the man asked. "Getting married," Mike said, and couldn't help but grin. The officer's face didn't change. He stamped the passport hard and handed it back. "Welcome to the Philippines." Mike walked through the sliding doors into the arrivals area. Families hugged and cried. Taxi drivers held up signs with names. Tour guides waved small flags. The noise hit him like a wall, people talking, babies crying, cars honking outside. He looked around for Ruby. She'd said she would wear a red dress so he could find her easily. But all he saw were strangers. His phone rang. Ruby's number. "Hello." Mike answered, his voice shaky. "Mike, I'm here, but I'm in the parking lot." The arrivals area was too crowded. "Can you come outside?" Mike felt his chest tighten. This wasn't what they'd planned. "I thought you were going to meet me inside." "I know, but there were too many people. Just come outside, okay? I'm by the white van." The line went dead. Mike stared at his phone. Ruby had never hung up on him before without saying goodbye. In all their video calls, she always said, "I love you," before ending the call. Mike pushed through the crowds toward the exit. The hot air outside hit him like opening an oven door. Car horns blared. Drivers shouted at each other. The smell of exhaust and street food filled his nose. He looked around for a white van. There were dozens of them. Which one was Ruby in? A man stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. He was tall and muscular, with dark eyes that seemed to look right through Mike. "You're Mike Hansen," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, I'm looking for Ruby. Is she with you?" The man smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "I'm Carlo, Ruby's brother. She's waiting in the van. Come with me." Mike had heard about Carlo in their video calls. Ruby had mentioned him a few times, but she'd never said much. Just that he was her older brother and he took care of the family. "Where is she?" Mike asked as they walked between the parked cars. "She's nervous," Carlos said. "Meeting someone for the first time is scary, you know? Even when you've been talking online for months." That made sense. Mike was nervous too. His hands were shaking and his mouth felt dry. They stopped at a white van with tinted windows. Carlo knocked on the side door twice, then once, then twice again. Like a secret code, the door slid open. A woman sat inside, but the interior was dark and Mike couldn't see her face clearly. "Ruby," he said softly. She didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded different from their phone calls. Quieter. "Hello, Mike." He climbed into the van and sat across from her. As his eyes got used to the darkness, he could see her better. She was beautiful, just like in her photos. But something was wrong. She wouldn't look at him directly. Her hands were folded in her lap, and she kept glancing at Carlo. "I'm so happy to finally meet you," Mike said. He reached for her hand. She let him take it, but her fingers were cold and stiff, not like someone who was excited to see the love of their life. Carlo got into the driver's seat and started the van. "We need to go. Traffic gets bad if we wait too long." "Where are we going?" Mike asked. To the hotel first, Ruby said. Then tomorrow we'll go get our marriage license. Mike smiled. This was really happening. Tomorrow he would start the process of marrying the woman of his dreams. But as the van pulled away from the airport, Mike noticed something that made his stomach feel strange. Ruby was looking at her phone, typing messages to someone. She was sitting right next to her future husband, but she was texting someone else. Who are you writing to? Mike asked, trying to keep his voice light. Ruby's head snapped up. She looked scared for just a second, then forced a smile. Just my sister, telling her you arrived safely. Mike nodded, but he felt confused. Ruby had never mentioned having a sister before. The hotel room was smaller than Mike had expected. One bed, one tiny bathroom, and a window that looked out at a concrete wall. Ruby sat on the edge of the bed, still looking at her phone. This is nice, Mike said, even though it wasn't. He'd paid for a better room, but maybe Ruby had changed the reservation to save money. That was sweet of her. I'm tired, Ruby said without looking up. The heat makes me sleepy. Mike wanted to talk to her. Really talk like they did during their video calls. But Ruby seemed different in person. Distant. Maybe she was just shy. Should we get some dinner? Mike asked. I'm excited to try real Filipino food. Ruby finally put down her phone. Okay, but first, I need to tell you something. Mike's heart started beating faster. What is it? The wedding. We might need to wait a few more days. There's a problem with the papers. What kind of problem? Ruby's hands twisted in her lap. Government offices here are slow. Sometimes they lose documents. It's very frustrating. Mike felt disappointed, but he tried not to show it. That's okay. I can wait. I've waited this long, right? Ruby smiled for the first time since he'd arrived, but still didn't reach her eyes. They went to a small restaurant down the street. The food was spicy and delicious, but Mike had trouble eating. He kept watching Ruby. She barely touched her food and kept checking her phone. Is everything okay? Mike asked. Yes, of course. What? You seem, I don't know, different than when we video chat. Ruby's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Different how? You're so quiet. On our calls, you talk all the time. You laugh at my jokes. You tell me about your day. I'm just nervous, Ruby said. This is a big change for me, too. That night, Mike lay awake listening to Ruby breathe beside him. She'd gone to sleep immediately, but he couldn't stop his mind from racing. Something felt wrong, but he couldn't figure out what. At 3 in the morning, Ruby's phone buzzed. She grabbed it quickly and checked the message. In the dim light from the screen, Mike saw her face. She looked worried. Who's texting you so late? Mike whispered. Ruby jumped. She hadn't known he was awake. Nobody, just spam messages. But Mike had seen enough of the screen to know it wasn't spam. Someone had sent her a long message in what looked like Tagalog, and she'd read it immediately, like it was important. The next morning, Carlo picked them up in the same white van. They drove to a government building where they were supposed to get their marriage license. But after waiting in line for 2 hours, they were told they needed different documents. This is so frustrating, Ruby said as they walked back to the van. I'm sorry, Mike. I know you want to get married quickly. It's not your fault, Mike said. These things happen. But later that day, Mike overheard Ruby talking to Carlo in rapid Tagalog. He didn't understand the words, but he could tell they were arguing about something. And several times, he heard them say his name. When Ruby came back to the hotel room, Mike was waiting for her. We need to talk, he said. Ruby's face went pale. About what? About what's really going on here. You've been acting strange since I arrived. You're always on your phone. You and Carlo are having secret conversations. And now there are problems with the wedding documents that you never mentioned before. Ruby sat down on the bed and put her face in her hands. You don't understand. Things are complicated here. Then explain it to me. I'm your fiancé. We're supposed to trust each other. Ruby was quiet for a long time. When she finally looked up, there were tears in her eyes. My family owes money to some bad people. A lot of money. If we don't pay them back soon, they'll hurt Carlo. Mike felt his heart sink. How much money? $50,000. The number hit Mike like a punch to the stomach. That was almost all of his savings. Ruby, I know it's a lot, but these people are dangerous. They've already threatened us. That's why Carlo has to come everywhere with me. He's protecting me. Mike looked at the woman he'd fallen in love with. 3 months ago, she'd been perfect. Beautiful, sweet, loving. She'd never mentioned family problems or dangerous people or needing money. Why didn't you tell me this before? Mike asked. Because I was afraid you wouldn't come. I was afraid you'd think I was just using you. Mike's phone buzzed. A text from his bank, asking if he'd authorized a large withdrawal from his account. His blood went cold. Ruby, he said slowly, did you take money from my account? Ruby's tears came faster now. I am sorry. I'm so sorry. But they said they would hurt Carlo if we didn't pay something today. I only took $5,000. Just enough to keep them happy until we could figure out what to do. Mike stared at her. His hands started shaking. You stole from me. It's not stealing if we're going to be married. Everything I have will be yours, and everything you have will be mine. That's how marriage works. But Mike wasn't listening anymore. He was thinking about all the things that had seemed wrong since he'd arrived. Ruby's cold hands, her distant behavior, the way she and Carlo communicated in code, the convenient problems with the wedding documents. I need some air, Mike said, and walked out of the hotel room. He stood on the street corner, watching the chaos of Manila traffic. Motorcycles weaved between cars. Vendors sold food from carts. Children played in the gutters. It was a world completely different from anything he'd ever known. And somewhere in this strange, loud, confusing city, the woman he'd thought he loved had just admitted to stealing his money. Mike pulled out his phone and called his bank. I need to freeze my account, he said. Right now. As he waited on hold, he saw Carlo's white van parked across the street. Carlo was sitting in the driver's seat, talking on his phone and watching Mike. Mike had the strangest feeling that he was being hunted. The police station door slammed shut behind Mike with a sound like thunder. His wrists burned where the handcuffs had been, and his head still ached from where Carlo had hit him during the arrest. But nothing hurt more than the confusion twisting in his chest. Sit down, Mr. Hansen, said the detective across from him. The man's nameplate read Detective Reyes, and his eyes were cold as winter. We need to talk about your girlfriend. Mike's mouth felt dry as sand. Ruby? What about her? Is she okay? Detective Reyes opened a thick folder and spread photos across the metal table. Mike's stomach dropped. There were pictures of him and Ruby at the restaurant. Pictures of him at the ATM machine. Pictures of Carlo's white van. And pictures of other men, white men like Mike, all looking confused and scared. Your girlfriend's name isn't Ruby Sato, Detective Reyes said. Her real name is Elena Vasquez, and she's been very busy. Mike stared at the photos. That's impossible. I've been video chatting with Ruby for months. I know her voice. I know her face. Look at this. Detective Reyes pulled out a newspaper clipping. The headline read, Local woman dies in car crash. Below, it was a photo of Ruby, the real Ruby. The same beautiful face Mike had fallen in love with online. Ruby Sato died 2 years ago, the detective continued. Someone has been using her identity to trick men like you. Foreign men with money. The room started spinning. Mike gripped the edge of the table. But the video calls, I talked to her face to face. Technology is amazing these days. With the right software, you can make a dead person seem alive on a computer screen. Elena is very good with computers. Mike felt sick. So the woman I've been with is a criminal. Elena Vasquez. She works with her boyfriend Carlo and several other people. They find lonely men online, steal identities of dead women, and create fake relationships. When a men visit the Philippines, they rob them. But she didn't rob me. She just took $5,000 for her family's emergency. Detective Reyes laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Mr. Hansen, check your bank account. Mike pulled out his phone with shaking hands. When he opened his banking app, he nearly threw up. His account was empty, completely empty. $53,000, his entire life savings was gone. Ow, he whispered. While you were sleeping, Elena used your phone to transfer money. She knew your passwords because you probably told her during one of your romantic video chats. Most men do. Mike remembered all the late-night conversations he'd had with Ruby, how she'd asked about his job, his apartment, his dreams of retiring early, how she'd seemed so interested in everything about his life, including his bank account information when he'd mentioned wanting to buy her a nice engagement ring. She stole everything, Mike said. That's not the worst part. Detective Reyes pulled out another photo. This one showed Mike at the airport, shaking hands with a man Mike didn't recognize. Do you know who this is? Mike studied the photo. No, I've never seen him before. His name is Antonio Cruz. He's a known drug dealer. According to our investigation, you gave him a suitcase full of money. What? That's crazy. I never met any drug dealer. Elena told you to carry a suitcase to the Philippines, didn't she? She said it was wedding gifts for her family. Mike's blood turned to ice. Yes, Elena, Ruby, had asked him to bring a suitcase. She'd said it contained presents from her friends in America who couldn't attend the wedding. She'd even helped him pack it before he left Seattle. I didn't know there was money in it, Mike said desperately. I thought it was just gifts. That's what they all say. But you see, Mr. Hansen, ignorance isn't a defense. You carried drug money across international borders. That makes you guilty of money laundering and drug trafficking. The walls of the police station seemed to close in around Mike. I'm a victim here. They tricked me. Maybe, but you still broke the law. Philippine law is very strict about drug crimes. You could spend 20 years in prison. Mike put his head in his hands. This couldn't be happening. 3 days ago, even a normal guy living in Seattle, excited about getting married. Now he was sitting in a foreign police station, accused of crimes he didn't even understand. I want to call the American embassy, Mike said. You can call them, but they can't change Philippine law. You committed crimes on Philippine soil. A new officer entered the room, carrying more papers. He whispered something to Detective Reyes in Tagalog. Both men looked at Mike with expressions he couldn't read. What now? Mike asked. We found Elena and Carlo. They were trying to leave the country with your money. Elena wants to make a deal. What kind of deal? She'll testify that you knew about the drug money. She'll say you were partners in the operation. In exchange, we'll reduce her sentence. Mike jumped up from his chair. That's a lie. I was a victim. Sit down, Mr. Hansen. Detective Reyes's voice was sharp. Elena has text messages between you two talking about packages and deliveries. She has photos of you counting money. She has recordings of phone calls where you discuss business arrangements. Those are fake. She's making it all up. Maybe. But Elena is very convincing. And she knows Philippine law better than you do. Juries here tend to believe local people over foreigners. Mike felt trapped like an animal in a cage. Every direction he looked, there were bars blocking his escape. Elena had planned this perfectly. She made him look guilty even though he was innocent. How long do I have to decide? Mike asked. Elena is meeting with the prosecutor tomorrow morning. After that, her deal won't be available anymore. You'll be charged with the maximum crimes. And if I confess to something I didn't do, maybe 10 years instead of 20. If you're lucky. Mike was led to a holding cell that smelled like sweat and fear. The concrete walls were covered with scratches made by previous prisoners counting days. A small window near the ceiling showed a square of darkening sky. His cellmate was an older Filipino man who introduced himself as Mangbert. What are you in for, American? I don't even know anymore, Mike said. I came here to get married, and now they're saying I'm a drug dealer. Mangbert not that now win Lee. Love scam. Happens all the time. They target lonely foreigners. How do you know about love scams? I used to be a police officer. Before I got arrested for something I didn't do either. Mangbert's smile was sad. The system here is complicated. Sometimes the truth doesn't matter as much as it should. Mike lay down on the hard concrete floor and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere out there, Elena was probably laughing with Carlo about how easy it had been to destroy his life. They had his money, his freedom, and soon they might even have his future. For the first time since arriving in the Philippines, Mike allowed himself to cry. The courtroom looked nothing like the ones Mike had seen on American TV shows. The walls were stained yellow from years of humidity, and the air conditioning rattled like an old car engine. Mike sat between two court-appointed lawyers who spoke English with thick accents and kept whispering to each other in Tagalog. Elena sat across the room, wearing a simple blue dress and no makeup. She looked young and innocent, nothing like the master criminal detective Reyes had described. When she glanced at Mike, her eyes filled with tears. Your Honor, the prosecutor began, the defendant Mike Hansen knowingly transported illegal drug money into our country. He worked with known criminals Elena Vasquez and Carlo Mendoza to launder money through fake romantic relationships. Mike's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, My client was the victim of an elaborate scam. He believed he was coming to the Philippines to marry the woman he loved. The judge, an elderly woman with silver hair, looked bored. She'd probably heard similar stories dozens of times. Elena was called to testify first. She walked to the witness stand like she was walking to her own execution, slow and scared. Miss Vasquez, the prosecutor said, "Please tell the court about your relationship with the defendant." Elena's voice was so quiet the judge had to ask her to speak louder. "Mike and I were business partners. He knew about the money in the suitcase. We planned everything together." Mike felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. She was lying, but she sounded so believable. "How did you communicate about these illegal activities?" the prosecutor asked. "Through coded messages. When Mike said he loved me, it meant the money was ready. When I said I missed him, it meant the pickup was arranged." Mike wanted to scream. Every sweet word they'd shared, every romantic moment. Elena was twisting it all into evidence against him. "Did Mr. Hansen ever express concerns about the illegal nature of your activities?" Elena wiped her eyes with a tissue. "No. He said American laws didn't matter in the Philippines. He said we could get rich and no one would catch us." Mike's lawyer objected, but the judge allowed Elena to continue. "Mike was the one who found the drug dealer contacts. He said he'd done this before in other countries. I was just following his instructions." When it was time for cross-examination, Mike's lawyer tried to poke holes in Elena's story. But Elena had answers for everything. She prepared well. "Miss Vasquez, if Mr. Hansen was truly your partner, why did you steal all his money?" "I didn't steal it. Mike gave it to me to hide from the police. He said if we got caught, I should keep the money safe until he got out of prison." It was brilliant and completely false. Elena made Mike sound like a criminal mastermind instead of a lonely man who'd been tricked. During the lunch break, Mike sat with his lawyers in a small restaurant near the courthouse. The food tasted like cardboard in his mouth. "It's not looking good," one lawyer admitted. "Elena is very convincing, and the evidence seems to support her story. But it's all fake," Mike said. "She manufactured everything. We know that, but proving it is different." Elena has been planning this for a long time. She knows exactly what to say. The afternoon session was worse. Carlo testified next, and his story matched Elena's perfectly. According to Carlo, Mike had approached them about setting up a money laundering operation. Mike had promised to bring American criminals to the Philippines to expand their business. He said Americans were stupid and trusting, Carlo testified. He said we could make millions by tricking them into bringing drug money across borders. Mike listened in horror as Carlo described detailed conversations that had never happened. Phone calls about drug deals that were actually conversations about wedding plans. Text messages about criminal activities that were really just love notes. By the end of the day, Mike looked like the leader of an international crime ring instead of its victim. That evening, back in his cell, Mike sat with his head in his hands. Mangbird offered him some rice from his dinner tray. "Bad day in court?" the older man asked. "They're destroying me. Every word I said to her out of love. They're using as evidence that I'm a criminal." "That's the thing about love," Mangbird said thoughtfully. "When it's real, it makes you vulnerable. When it's fake, it makes you a weapon." "I don't understand. Elena never loved you. But you loved her. So every truth you told her became a lie she could use against you. Every secret you shared became ammunition for her war against you." Mike thought about all the nights he'd stayed up late talking to Ruby on video chat. How he'd told her about his loneliness after his divorce. How he'd shared his dreams of finding someone who would love him for who he really was. How he'd opened his heart completely to a woman who was already planning to destroy him. How do people do that? Mike asked. How do they pretend to love someone just to hurt them? "Some people see love as weakness," Mangbert replied. "They think caring about others makes you stupid. They don't understand that love is actually the bravest thing humans can do." "I feel so stupid." "You're not stupid. You're trusting. There's a difference." Mike looked out the small window at the Manila skyline. Lights were starting to come on in apartment buildings and office towers. Somewhere out there, Elena was probably counting his money and planning her next victim. "What happens tomorrow?" Mike asked. "You tell your truth," Mangbert said. "Even if no one believes you. Even if it doesn't change anything. You tell your truth because that's all you have left. Mike spent the night lying awake, preparing for the most important speech of his life. Tomorrow he would testify in his own defense. Tomorrow he would try to convince a judge that love had made him innocent, not guilty. But deep down, Mike was starting to wonder if innocence mattered anymore. Elena had turned his greatest strength, his ability to love, into his greatest weakness. And now that weakness might send him to prison for the rest of his life. The chapel within Manila City Jail exists in a pocket of stillness that seems impossible in such a chaotic place. Morning light filters through stained glass windows, casting fragments of blue and gold across concrete floors worn smooth by thousands of desperate prayers. Mike Hansen sits alone in the front pew, his hands folded not in supplication, but in a kind of peace he hasn't felt in months. 6 weeks have passed since the trial ended. 6 weeks since the judge sentenced him to 18 months for negligent facilitation of money laundering. A compromise verdict that satisfied no one, but kept him from the 20-year nightmare Detective Reyes had threatened. The American embassy had finally intervened, but their help came with conditions and lectures about personal responsibility in foreign relationships. Mike no longer flinches when other inmates ask what he's in for. The shame that once burned in his chest like acid has transformed into something else. Not pride, exactly, but a clear-eyed understanding of how he arrived here. He was a victim, yes, but he was also a man who had been so hungry for love that he'd ignored every warning sign his instincts had whispered. The chapel door creaks open behind him. Father Santos, the prison chaplain, enters carrying his morning coffee and wearing the expression of a man who has heard every possible human confession. Still here, Mike? Father Santos settles into the pew beside him. You've been coming every day for 2 weeks now. It's quiet here, Mike says. I can think clearly. Through the stained glass, the sounds of Manila drift in like a distant symphony. Car horns and vendor calls, children laughing and motorcycles rumbling. Life continuing its relentless forward motion while Mike sits suspended in this strange pause between his old existence and whatever comes next. What are you thinking about today? Father Santos asks. Mike considers the question. For weeks after the trial, his thoughts have been a storm of anger and self-pity. Rage at Elena and Carlo. Fury at the Philippine justice system. Disgust at his own stupidity. But gradually, like sediment settling in disturbed water, those emotions had cleared to reveal something unexpected underneath. I was remembering the night before I flew here. Mike says, I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining what my life would be like as a married man. Ruby, Elena, had sent me this video of the sunset from her apartment balcony. She said she watched it every evening and thought about our future together. Father Santos nods, waiting. I watched that video probably 50 times that night. And I remember thinking that finally, someone had chosen me. Someone saw value in who I was. Mike's voice carries no bitterness now, just observation. But that was the lie I told myself. I wasn't being chosen. I was being selected. There's a difference. Tell me about that difference. Mike watches dust motes dance in the colored light. When someone chooses you, they see who you really are and decide you're worth loving. When someone selects you, they see what you can provide and decide you're worth using. I spent so much time feeling grateful to be selected that I forgot to ask if I was actually being seen. The insight sits between them like a third presence. Mike has turned this realization over in his mind for days, examining it from every angle, testing its weight. Elena never asked me about my fears, Mike continues. Never wondered what kept me awake at night or what I dreamed about when I was happy. She asked about my salary and my savings and my retirement plans. She memorized my vulnerabilities, but never bothered to learn my character. Father Santos sips his coffee thoughtfully. And what would someone find if they took the time to learn your character? The question stops Mike short. For so long, he defined himself by what he lacked. No wife, no children, no one to come home to. Elena had seemed to offer completion for his incomplete life. But sitting here in this quiet chapel, surrounded by the debris of his romantic disaster, Mike finds himself considering a different possibility. I think they'd find someone who loves deeply, he says slowly. Maybe too deeply, too quickly. Someone who sees the best in people even when he shouldn't. Someone who would rather trust and be hurt than live behind walls. Those sound like strengths, not weaknesses. Elena made them feel like weaknesses. Every generous impulse I had, every moment of trust, she used them against me. By the end, I felt like my capacity to love was some kind of character flaw. Mike stands and walks to the stained glass window, depicting the parable of the Good Samaritan. The anonymous traveler kneeling beside a wounded stranger, offering help without expectation of reward. But sitting here, thinking about it all, I don't want to become someone who can't love. I don't want Elena to take that from me too. Father Santos joins him at the window. What do you want instead? I want a love from strength, not from emptiness. I want to choose people who choose me back, not because they need something from me, but because they genuinely enjoy who I am. The words feel revolutionary as Mike speaks them. For most of his adult life, he'd approached relationships like a supplicant, grateful for any attention, willing to overlook red flags in exchange for the promise of companionship. Even with his ex-wife, he'd been so afraid of being alone that he'd ignore their fundamental incompatibility until she finally left him for someone who saw her more clearly. That sounds like wisdom, Father Santos says. It feels more like survival. A letter arrived yesterday from Elena's lawyer. She wants to meet with Mike before his release next month. To explain, to apologize, to ask for his forgiveness. Mike has read the request 3 times and feels nothing. No anger, no curiosity, no desire for closure. Elena's story is finished for him. Her apologies cannot return his money or his time or his innocence about the world's capacity for calculated cruelty. I used to think forgiveness meant having a conversation with the person who hurt you, Mike says. But I think real forgiveness is just letting go of the need for that conversation. Elena will have to live with what she did. I don't need to help her feel better about it. The chapel bell chimes 9 o'clock. Soon, Mike will return to his cell for count, then to the prison library where he's been helping other inmates write letters to their families. Simple work that requires no emotional investment beyond basic human kindness. It suits him. I've been thinking about what I'll do when I get out, Mike says. I can't go back to my old life. That version of myself, the one who was so desperate to be loved that he ignored obvious lies, he's gone. Who takes his place? Mike smiles for the first time in weeks. Someone who knows the difference between being lonely and being alone. Someone who understands that the right person won't make you feel grateful for their attention. They'll make you feel grateful for your own company. Father Santos chuckles. That's either very wise or very cynical. Maybe both. They sit in comfortable silence as the morning light shifts across the chapel floor. Mike thinks about Mangbird, released last week after his conviction was overturned on appeal. Before leaving, the older man had pressed a worn paperback into Mike's hands, a collection of poems by Jose Rizal about finding dignity in suffering. The strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire, Mangbird had said. You came here soft metal. You'll leave here something harder to break. Mike hadn't understood then what his cellmate meant. But sitting in this chapel, feeling the solid weight of his own self-possession, he begins to grasp it. Elena had tried to break him by stealing his money and his freedom. But she couldn't steal his capacity for growth. She couldn't take his ability to learn from pain and transform it into strength. Father, Mike says finally, do you think it's possible to be grateful for the worst thing that ever happened to you? What do you think? Mike considers the question seriously. The financial loss still stings. The legal consequences remain real. The betrayal left scars that may never fully heal. But underneath all that damage, something new has grown. A clearer understanding of his own worth. A deeper appreciation for authentic connection. A harder one, but more durable kind of self-respect. I think Elena taught me something she never intended to teach, Mike says. She showed me what love looks like when it's real versus when it's performed. And now I know the difference. That knowledge cost me everything I thought I valued. But maybe everything I thought I valued wasn't worth very much to begin with. The chapel door opens again. Another inmate enters. A young Filipino man Mike recognizes from the cafeteria. He nods respectfully and takes a seat in the back, head bowed in his own private contemplation. Father Santos stands to leave. Your release papers will be processed next week. Any idea where you'll go? Mike looks once more at the stained glass Good Samaritan. Back to Seattle, eventually. I still have my job if I want it. My company held my position. But first, I think I'll travel a bit. See some places I've always wanted to visit. Take my time getting reacquainted with myself. Alone. Alone, Mike confirms, and the word feels like freedom rather than failure. I want to learn what it's like to be my own good company before I try to be anyone else's. Walking back to his cell, Mike passes the guard station where Elena's letter still waits in his property box. He doesn't retrieve it. Some conversations are finished before they begin. Some forgiveness happens in the space where words are unnecessary. In his cell, Mike opens Mangbert's book of poetry and reads about resilience and dignity and the quiet power of a soul that refuses to be diminished by temporary circumstances. Outside, Manila continues its beautiful chaos. Inside, Mike Hansen prepares to rejoin the world as someone who finally understands that the most important love story is the one you write with yourself. He may have come to the Philippines searching for someone to complete him, but he'll leave knowing he was never incomplete to begin with, just convinced he was by people who profit from that particular lie. And that knowledge, hard-won and steel-strong, is something no one can ever steal from him again.